Part 1. The Somber Funeral and the Mysterious Barking. The gray sky hung like a giant leaden curtain, pressing down on the small town nestled at the foot of the hills. Dark clouds, swollen with unshed tears, drifted lazily, so slow it seemed they too bore the weight of infinite sorrow, waiting to merge with the mournful atmosphere that permeated everything. The old church bell tolled steadily, its somber tones piercing the quiet air, not dispelling the gloom but instead deepening the sense of loss and unease creeping through every street corner, every soul. In the damp, cold green of the cemetery beside the church, a silent crowd gathered. Dressed in stark black, the color of mourning, they formed a quiet circle around the gleaming oak casket. Inside, resting eternally, lay Eleanor Vance, a kind soul, a warm heart that had comforted so many lives in this town, a woman respected and beloved by all for her selfless kindness and sincerity. The air was thick with grief, soft sobs occasionally breaking the silence, mingling with the sigh of the autumn wind rustling through the ancient headstones. But amidst the solemnity and sorrow of the funeral, a discordant sound, an undeniable abnormality, shattered the fragile quiet. Lucky, Eleanor Vance's loyal golden retriever, her four-legged companion who had never left her side in life, now stood close to the coffin. His usually sleek golden coat stood on end like sharp quills, his intelligent brown eyes flashing with alertness and agitation. He barked incessantly, each bark echoing, urgent, filled with desperation and what seemed like fierce resistance. Lucky's sharp gaze never left the wooden box, as if he sensed something dreadful, a dark truth hidden from mortal eyes. His barks echoed throughout the cemetery, bouncing off the cold stone walls of the church, seeping into the minds of the mourners, sending shivers down their spines as a vague sense of unease began to spread. "That dog? What's wrong with him?" an elderly woman whispered to the person beside her, her voice trembling with confusion and a hint of fear. "It looks like he's trying to say something." "He's probably just overcome with grief," the other replied, but their eyes couldn't hide their own unease as they looked towards Lucky. Though they tried to remain calm, tried to focus on the ceremony, no one in the crowd could deny that the dog's behavior was truly strange, almost eerie, planting a seed of doubt and anxiety in their hearts. Father Michael, the elderly priest with salt and pepper hair presiding over the funeral, stood at a makeshift outdoor pulpit. His face showed strain. He attempted a reassuring smile, but his tightly pressed lips and eyes constantly scanning the crowd betrayed his inner tension. He cleared his throat, trying to regain solemnity. "Please let us maintain order," he said, his voice slightly unsteady. "The dog is merely expressing his grief in his own way." But small gestures, a hand gripping the Bible so tightly his knuckles turned white, the beads of sweat forming on his brow despite the cool air, did not escape the keen eyes of a stranger in the crowd. That stranger was Ethan, a weathered traveler with tousled brown hair and worn but clean clothes. He stood silently at the edge of the crowd, detached, like a misplaced shadow at the somber gathering. His eyes were deep-set, sharp as a razor, and held a thoughtful quality, an unusual intuition. No one in town knew where he came from. He had appeared a few days prior like an unexpected breeze, simply observing quietly. Ethan's silence and scrutinizing gaze made him an unintentional focal point, though he didn't seek the attention. When Ethan's sharp eyes met Lucky's, he instantly sensed something was wrong. He wasn't one to readily believe in the supernatural, but his gut told him the dog's persistent, indignant barking wasn't the meaningless act of a grieving pet. It wasn't the mournful howl or lonely whimper of loss. It was a warning, an accusation. Lucky was trying to communicate, trying to voice some truth buried beneath this veneer of sorrow, a truth being swallowed by the darkness of silence. Ethan slowly took a few steps forward, his feet steady on the damp grass. Each step was deliberate, his eyes fixed on the agitated dog. Lucky, as if sensing a different energy, an unjudging attention from the stranger, suddenly stopped barking for a moment. He tilted his head, ears perked, his intelligent brown eyes looking directly at Ethan as if assessing him, waiting. A silent, almost invisible connection formed between the man and the dog. And in that brief moment Ethan knew he couldn't just watch from afar. Fate, or perhaps an irresistible curiosity, had drawn him into the vortex of this small town. Amidst the gloomy atmosphere, the fearful whispers and the bewildered glances, a secret lay waiting, silently demanding to be exposed, a secret capable of shaking the town's fragile peace to its core and changing its destiny forever. Part 2. Inside the church, signs of unease. The silence inside the church was thicker, heavier even than the air outside in the cemetery. The pungent scent of incense mingled with the smell of sputtering beeswax candles and the damp mustiness of the ancient stone walls. The dim light from the altar candles barely illuminated the long, empty wooden pews and the tear-streaked faces of Eleanor's closest loved ones, those who remained after the outdoor service. Stifled sobs and weary sighs created a mournful symphony. But amidst this seemingly settled atmosphere, Lucky's barking erupted again, this time even more fiercely and insistently. The dog had followed the family members inside and now stood steadfastly beside the coffin, placed prominently in the center aisle. His front paws seemed rooted to the cold stone floor, ears pricked high, and those amber eyes remained fixed on the wooden box where his beloved owner rested. This time, the barking wasn't just desperation. It held anger, defiance, as if he were confronting an unseen enemy right there in the holy sanctuary. The small remaining crowd began to stir again, their whispers now tinged not just with confusion but with fear. "Dear Lord, he's barking again. He keeps staring at the coffin like there's something inside," a woman whispered, her voice trembling, her hand tightly clutching the cross around her neck. Father Michael, now back at the main pulpit, tried to calm everyone with a gentler tone. He forced a smile that looked terribly out of place on his pale face. He raised a hand in a familiar gesture calling for calm. "Please, everyone, please be calm. Something in the church must be frightening Lucky. He's just a grieving dog missing his owner. Please, let us continue praying for the repose of Eleanor's soul." But his voice, despite its attempted firmness, couldn't quite mask his own unease and a fleeting panic in his eyes. He glanced quickly at Lucky, then scanned the remaining faces, as if checking if anyone noticed his growing anxiety. Ethan, still standing at the back of the church, leaning against the cold stone wall with his arms crossed, watched every development intently. He felt like a director observing his own play, except he didn't yet know his role. His gaze settled on Lucky. The dog hadn't taken his eyes off the coffin, unfazed by the priest's reassurances or the crowd's murmurs. Ethan noticed something stranger. Lucky's barking wasn't random panicked yelps or mindless grief. It had a rhythm, a purpose, as if desperately trying to convey an urgent message, a warning beyond human language, and it seemed no one in the room, except perhaps himself, was truly listening. Suddenly Lucky stopped barking. The abrupt silence made the air even more tense. His ears remained erect, alert. Then he began to growl softly, a low, threatening sound rumbling deep in his chest. At the same moment, the heavy fragrance of the white chrysanthemums and lilies surrounding the coffin became almost suffocatingly strong. A heavy, invisible presence seemed to descend upon the space, as if a cold darkness was slowly creeping in, infiltrating every corner of the ancient church. Ethan decided to act. He pushed himself away from the wall, his slow, deliberate footsteps echoing on the stone floor, drawing a few glances. His eyes swept over the faces present, the grieving relatives, the curious neighbors, finally resting on Father Michael's pale visage. Though the priest tried to maintain composure, chanting prayers in a steady voice, Ethan noticed the slight tremor in the hand holding the thick Bible. A sharp sliver of suspicion pierced Ethan's mind. What was the priest afraid of? Or, what was he hiding? He thought silently. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for an impending storm. Lucky turned his head towards Ethan as he approached. The dog's eyes seemed to light up with a faint glimmer of hope, as if he had finally found someone capable of understanding his silent language. Ethan crouched down to Lucky's eye level, the space between them feeling separate from the rest of the room. He whispered, softly enough for only the dog to hear, "You're trying to tell us something, aren't you, boy?" Lucky didn't respond with a bark. Instead, he let out a soft, meaningful snort, then turned his determined gaze back towards the coffin, an unmistakable pointer. A cold chill ran down Ethan's spine. A strange intuition, a premonition of something deeply wrong, of a horrifying truth sealed within that wooden box, surged powerfully within him. The wind outside whistled mournfully through the stained glass windows, mingling with the fading whispers of the crowd, like a warning from afar. Amidst the thick atmosphere of the funeral, amidst the grief and mourning, the anomaly was more than just a dog's bark. It was an alarm bell, the beginning of a complex mystery slowly revealing its first pieces. Something terrible had been hidden, a secret someone had tried to bury along with Eleanor Vance. And Lucky, with his boundless loyalty and keen animal instinct, was the living key, the first piece in this dangerous and convoluted puzzle. Part 3, The Old House and the Desperate Letter. After the service ended in an atmosphere of awkwardness and lingering doubt, as the last mourners departed, night began to fall upon the town. The sparse, weak yellow lights from the houses weren't enough to dispel the heavy darkness and the somewhat eerie silence that enveloped the place. Ethan stood alone before the church gate, his gaze directed towards the path leading out of town. But he didn't leave. An invisible pull, a strong intuitive urge, drew him in the opposite direction, towards Eleanor Vance's old, isolated house. Lucky, as if reading Ethan's thoughts or simply following instinct, was already waiting there. He gently nudged his head against Ethan's leg, then turned, leading the way with quick but cautious steps. His ears remained pricked, alert to the slightest sound, his nose constantly sniffing the damp night air. With every step Ethan took on the leaf-strewn path, through the garden that was beginning to run wild, it felt like touching a veil of mystery, something unnameable, a truth buried beneath layers of silence and darkness. Eleanor's house stood nestled on the edge of a small wood, separate from the other houses in town. Under the weak silver moonlight filtering through the leaves, it appeared lonely and somewhat eerie. The moss-covered stone walls looked cold, the dust-caked window panes like blind eyes staring out at the world. The heavy oak door was only slightly ajar, and when Ethan pushed it gently, it emitted a mournful creak, like the sigh of a lonely old soul. Lucky didn't hesitate, slipping inside first, then stopping just over the threshold, growling softly in his throat, a familiar sign of caution. The interior was filled with the characteristic musty smell of old, uninhabited houses, mixed with the scent of decaying wood and an unusual chill, as if time had stopped here long ago, at the moment Eleanor drew her last breath. Ethan's eyes needed a few seconds to adjust to the darkness. The only light came from faint moonbeams slanting through the grimy windows, painting strange shapes on the floor. He switched on the small flashlight he carried, sweeping its beam around the simple but tidy living room. Furniture was draped in white sheets, silent like hibernating creatures. On a small, worn varnished wooden table in the corner, amidst various trinkets, something caught Ethan's eye, an envelope placed neatly beside an old silver picture frame. Lucky immediately jumped onto a nearby armchair, let out a soft whine, and nudged his muzzle towards the table, signaling Ethan to approach. Clearly the dog knew something about these items. Ethan picked up the letter. The envelope bore no recipient's name, only a wax seal that had been broken. His hand trembled slightly as he recognized the familiar handwriting inside, slightly shaky but firm, Eleanor's handwriting. The letter was short, hastily written, but every word conveyed urgency, fear, and utter desperation. To whoever finds this letter, I can no longer remain silent. This secret is too heavy, too terrible. What Father Michael is doing is not just embezzling church funds as I initially suspected. It is a horrific betrayal of God and all of us. I stumbled upon undeniable proof, hidden where he would never suspect, a place known only to God and myself. But I know this action puts me in grave danger. He won't stop at threats. I feel his eyes on me constantly. If someone reads this letter after I am gone, please bring everything to light. Find the truth. But be extremely careful. He is dangerous and will do anything to protect himself and what he has built. Ethan looked up from the letter, his chest tightening. He glanced at the picture frame beside it. It was a photo of Eleanor standing next to Father Michael at a church event some years ago. But strangely, instead of her usual kind smile, Eleanor's face in the picture was etched with extreme tension, her eyes wide with anxiety, almost terror, as if wanting to scream a silent plea no one could hear. Father Michael's smile beside her, in this light, looked artificial and sinister. Just then, Lucky snorted sharply, his brown eyes fixed on an old landscape painting hanging on the wall opposite the fireplace. The painting depicted a peaceful countryside scene, but now it looked utterly out of place in the gloomy room. Ethan walked over, his intuition nagging him. He carefully lifted the painting off its wall hook. Beneath the thick dust and cobwebs, taped securely to the back of the wooden frame, was a small brass key tarnished with time. He gently detached the key, the cold metal seeping into his palm. He felt as if he had just grasped a crucial piece of the puzzle, a link connecting the scattered events. Seeing this, Lucky wagged his tail furiously, his eyes bright as if to say, "That's it. That's the one. We're on the right track." Ethan clenched the small key in his hand, his mind filled with unanswered questions. Where had Eleanor hidden the proof? What had Father Michael done to frighten her so badly? Was her death truly the natural accident everyone believed? But one thing he knew for sure. This secret involved far more than just embezzlement. It was deeper, darker, and far more dangerous, for it seemed to have cost Eleanor Vance her life and was casting a shadow over the entire town. Lucky let out a soft, urging whine as if time was running out. Ethan looked down at the loyal dog, his unexpected but most trusted companion now, and whispered with determination, "All right, boy. We have to find where this key belongs. This story is far from over." With the key in hand and Lucky's instinctive guidance, Ethan knew their next step would lead them to the place where darkness was most desperately trying to conceal the truth. He had a strong feeling that place was none other than the church itself, where he believed Father Michael's biggest, darkest secret lay hidden behind a facade of silence and false sanctity. But would they have the courage and strength to face what awaited them? The answer lay behind the heavy church doors, under the stern gaze of stone saints. Part 4. The Secret Passage and the Horrifying Truth. Night had deepened. The pale crescent moon struggled to pierce the thick clouds, casting an eerie silver sheen on the old moss-covered stone walls of the church. Ethan, the small but heavy key clutched in his palm, moved slowly and cautiously through the large oak door leading into the main sanctuary. The door wasn't locked, but it groaned mournfully as he pushed it open. Beside him, Lucky moved almost silently, his golden coat blending into the shadows, but his ears remained pricked high and alert, his nose twitching constantly as if scenting hidden danger in the still air. The church interior was plunged into near-absolute darkness, illuminated only by the weak, flickering light of a few remaining candles on the altar, which danced and cast distorted, eerie shadows on the cold stone walls and empty pews. The air was cold and carried the faint, lingering scent of old incense. Ethan switched his flashlight back on, its white beam sweeping through the dark corners, highlighting the stern gazes of stone saints and the magnificent stained-glass windows that now looked like giant eyes watching the intruder's every move. His gaze settled on a rather large marble statue of St. Peter, placed solemnly in a dim corner near the altar. Following his intuition and a bit of luck, Ethan shone the flashlight beam carefully onto the statue's base. His hands trembled slightly as he inserted the small brass key into a tiny, almost invisible slot, cleverly disguised amidst the natural veins of the stone. A dry, small but distinct sound echoed in the absolute silence. It felt like a greeting from the past, shattering the heavy quiet, signaling that a secret was about to be revealed. Ethan pulled gently. A section of the statue's base, actually a small, intricately crafted stone door, slowly swung inward, revealing a narrow stone spiral staircase leading deep underground. A blast of frigid air, carrying the thick smell of damp earth and the gloom of things hidden for decades, hit Ethan and Lucky full in the face. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to calm the pounding in his chest. Determination flashed in his eyes as he peered down into the consuming darkness below. Lucky stood close beside him, growling softly in his throat, an instinctive reaction to the unseen danger, but the dog showed no fear, no desire to retreat. Ethan crouched down, gently stroking the loyal dog's fur, his only companion on this perilous venture, whispering encouragement, "We have to keep going, Lucky. This is the only way to find the truth, to get justice for Eleanor." The two figures, one man and one dog, began their cautious descent down the narrow, dark stairs. The air grew colder and thicker with each step. Ethan's footfalls on the worn stone steps echoed dully, amplified in the confined space, as if the place itself wanted to swallow them into its eternal darkness. Under the flickering flashlight beam, gray stone walls covered in green moss and thick cobwebs appeared, giving the impression they were entering an ancient crypt, another world entirely separate from the reality above. Reaching the bottom step, Ethan saw a large iron door blocking the way. It was heavily rusted with time, its bars bent, but it still stood firm like a loyal sentinel guarding the secret behind it. Lucky stopped before the door, his brown eyes fixed on the rust, his nose twitching rapidly before letting out a soft warning whine. Ethan stepped forward, placing his hand on the cold metal surface. His hands shook slightly as he pushed the door with all his might. It shrieked with a piercing metallic screech and slowly swung open. The space inside was a small room, perhaps once a wine cellar or storage area for the church. The air was cold, damp, and suffocating. But it wasn't the surroundings that stunned Ethan. In the middle of the room, illuminated by his flashlight, a figure sat slumped in an old wooden chair, hands tied tightly behind their back, head bowed low onto their chest, long, tangled brown hair obscuring most of the face. The person's clothes were tattered and caked with dirt. Ethan rushed closer, his heart skipping a beat as he recognized the woman. It was Abigail Hayes, the baker's daughter, a lively and kind young woman the whole town believed had suddenly disappeared weeks ago without a word. "Abigail!" Ethan exclaimed, his voice a mixture of astonishment, relief, and a dawning horror as the truth began to register. He quickly set the flashlight down, using the small knife he always carried to cut the rough ropes binding her wrists and ankles, ropes pulled so tight they had left deep marks. Lucky stood beside them, growling softly, his sharp eyes scanning the dark room, ensuring no other threats lurked nearby. As the last ropes fell away, Abigail lifted her head. In the flashlight's beam, her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes wide with terror but also flickering with a faint spark of hope upon seeing Ethan. Thank you," she whispered, her voice weak and raspy from dehydration and perhaps from desperate screaming but still audible. Ethan helped her to her feet. Her body trembled violently from cold and fear. After taking a small sip of water from Ethan's canteen and regaining some strength, Abigail began to recount her horrifying tale, her voice still shaky but filled with indignation. "Father Michael? He wasn't just embezzling church money. He was hiding much darker secrets. I accidentally overheard him talking and later found proof of his other sins, things related to the disappearances of several people in the past. Mrs. Vance suspected too and started investigating. But before she and I could do anything to expose him, he found out. He dealt with Mrs. Vance and kidnapped me, locked me down here. He wanted to silence me forever." Abigail's words struck Ethan like a hammer blow, cutting through the thick, cold air of the dark cellar like a sharp knife. The truth was far more terrible than he had imagined. Father Michael wasn't just an embezzler, he was a kidnapper and, quite possibly, a murderer. Ethan clenched his fists, his knuckles white, his eyes hardening with cold determination. He knew this truth was too big, too dangerous, and the threat was still present, lurking nearby. Just then, from the top of the stone staircase, heavy, hurried footsteps echoed down. The footsteps of someone trying to cover their crimes. A low, menacing, and angry voice boomed from the darkness above. "I wondered when you'd come snooping around down here. Did you really think you could just interfere in my affairs and walk away?" Ethan spun around instantly, raising the flashlight high, its beam shining directly up the stairs. The cold, furious, and somewhat panicked face of Father Michael materialized in the white light. His eyes narrowed, glinting with malice. In his hand, he gripped a heavy wooden staff, the kind often used in ceremonies, but now it looked more like a deadly weapon. Lucky immediately growled fiercely, the fur on his neck bristling, his body tensed, ready to attack the enemy at any moment to protect those he considered friends. Ethan quickly stepped in front of Abigail, who was trembling with fear. His eyes met Father Michael's directly, unwavering, without a trace of fear. He knew the real battle to expose the truth, to fight for justice, had officially begun right here in this dark, damp place. Part 5. The Confrontation Underground. Father Michael's footsteps echoed rhythmically on the stone stairs as he slowly descended, each heavy tread like a death knell pounding in the cold, oppressive air of the cellar. His face, now fully revealed in the weak light of the flashlight Ethan had placed on an old wooden crate, was a strange mixture of restrained fury and the sheer terror of a cornered man whose true face had been exposed. His eyes were bloodshot, glaring at Ethan and Abigail as if they were cursed interlopers. You meddling fools don't understand anything." Father Michael spat, his voice deep but unable to hide the tremor of anger and perhaps fear. "Everything I did. It was all to protect this church. To protect the faith of this idiotic town. If you know what's good for you, stop right now, hand over whatever you found, and get out of here before it's too late." He gripped the wooden staff tighter, his knuckles white. Ethan remained standing protectively in front of Abigail, who was trying to stay calm but still trembled uncontrollably. He looked directly into Father Michael's eyes, his own gaze sharp as a dagger, offering no quarter. "Protect the church by embezzling donations from your parishioners? By kidnapping, imprisoning, and possibly even murdering those who dared to stand up to you?" Ethan's voice was cold, steely. "The truth isn't something that can be buried forever under a cloak of false piety, Father Michael." The priest let out a harsh laugh, a sound that was bitter, crazed, and full of mockery. What do you know? What does a drifter like you understand about sacrifice? About responsibility? Sometimes, to protect something great, a sacred legacy, we are forced to sacrifice a few small things, remove unnecessary obstacles." His eyes took on a wild look. "What you call sacrifice, or removing obstacles, is just a cover for your bottomless greed and cruel deceit." Ethan took a step forward, gripping the flashlight not just for light anymore, but as a makeshift defensive weapon, ready for anything. "You exploited the trust of this entire town, betrayed the very people who respected and believed in you most, including Mrs. Vance. And now you will pay for all the crimes you've committed." It seemed Ethan's words pushed Father Michael past his breaking point. Without another word, He let out an enraged roar and suddenly lunged forward like a wounded animal. The heavy wooden staff in his hand swung high, whistling through the air as it aimed straight for Ethan's head with terrifying force. But Ethan, with the quick reflexes of someone accustomed to danger, managed to lean aside just in time. The staff flew past, missing his temple by inches, and struck the stone wall behind him with a dull thud, dislodging a few flakes of mortar. Simultaneously, Lucky, like a golden blur, sprang into action. The loyal dog, unafraid of Father Michael's larger size, launched himself straight at the priest's leg with a fierce growl. His sharp teeth sank deep into the priest's ankle, the powerful bite making the man scream in pain and stumble, losing his balance and crashing heavily onto the cold, damp earth floor. Rage and pain flared violently in Father Michael's eyes. Lying on the ground, he tried desperately to kick Lucky away with his free leg, cursing non-stop. But the loyal dog, despite taking a few blows, refused to let go, his jaws clamped tight. Ethan seized the golden opportunity while Father Michael was distracted. He lunged forward, grabbing for the wooden staff. A brief but incredibly fierce struggle ensued on the cold cellar floor. Ethan, though not as large, used his youthful strength and determination to protect Abigail and himself, wrestling with all his might against the frantically resisting priest. Finally, with a powerful wrench, Ethan tore the staff from his grasp. It clattered onto the stone floor with a heavy dry sound that echoed in the cellar's stillness. "It's over, Father Michael," Ethan said, his voice cold as steel, breathing heavily after the struggle. He pointed the end of the staff towards the fallen priest as a warning. "There's no way out. Nothing left to hide." Father Michael lay broken on the ground, utterly exhausted and desperate. His breathing was heavy, ragged. The wild fury in his eyes was gone, replaced by sheer panic, the collapse of a man who knew everything was finished. You don't understand? If this truth gets out, not just me but the reputation of this church, the legacy of generations, it will all crumble, it will all end." He stammered, his voice trailing off in a desperate, pleading tone. Ethan frowned, a fleeting flicker of pity quickly overwhelmed by disgust. He bent down, looking directly into the priest's fear-filled eyes. "If a church, a faith, is built on lies, crime, and the blood of innocents, then it deserves to collapse. But this town, these people, they won't end. They will grieve, they will suffer loss, but they will rise stronger once your shadow no longer looms over them." Only then did Lucky release Father Michael's leg, standing beside Ethan, his eyes still fixed on the man who had caused so much pain, like a loyal and courageous guardian. His steadfast gaze seemed to affirm that truth and justice would be defended, no matter the danger. Ethan used the very ropes he had just cut from Abigail to tightly bind Father Michael's hands behind his back. The priest offered no resistance, merely muttering meaningless words in despair. "You will face justice, face the consequences of what you've done," Ethan said, his gaze resolute. Leading the defeated Father Michael, who stumbled like a shadow, Ethan and Lucky supported Abigail, still weak but with relief and gratitude shining in her eyes. They ascended the cold stone steps, leaving the dark, damp cellar behind them. The faint light from the main sanctuary above filtered down, signaling the end of the darkness. But Ethan knew the real battle had just begun. Above them, an entire town waited, likely still unaware of the true face of the man they revered. The light of truth was about to be revealed, and it would undoubtedly turn everything upside down. Lucky walked steadily beside Ethan, ears pricked, tail giving a slight wag like a soldier ready for the final engagement. They had survived the direct confrontation, but to truly change this town, to heal its wounds, Ethan knew he and Lucky would need more than courage. They needed the truth and, more importantly, they needed the community's trust and unity to return. And that was something only the light of truth could bring. Part 6. The Truth Revealed in the Light. The next morning's sky still held traces of the previous night's gloom, but the first weak rays of sunlight bravely pierced the misty veil, gradually bathing the small town in a more peaceful light, a new beginning. However, that peace was quickly broken by the unusual gathering of townsfolk in front of the church. They had been summoned by the urgent ringing of the church bells early that morning. Not the bells for mass or a funeral, but bells signaling a momentous event. Eyes filled with curiosity, anxiety, and confusion watched the scene unfold. Ethan, the stranger who was no longer strange, stood on the church's highest step. Beside him stood Abigail Hayes, pale but with determination in her eyes. And behind them, held firmly by two strong men from the town, was Father Michael. Once the most respected figure, a symbol of faith and decency, now with his head bowed, face ashen, hands tied securely behind his back. Lucky sat majestically beside Ethan, his golden coat gleaming in the morning sun, his sharp eyes observing the crowd, as if he knew the most crucial moment had arrived. Ethan took a step forward, holding up a small, old metal box. The very box containing the evidence he and Abigail had found in the secret cellar, guided by Eleanor Vance's letter. "People of this town," he called out, his voice clear and strong, cutting through the murmurs and whispers of the growing crowd. "There is a truth that has been hidden from you for too long. A truth that Eleanor Vance paid for with her life trying to expose. Today that truth deserves to be known." All eyes focused on the metal box in Ethan's hand as he carefully opened the lid. A hush fell over the small square. Inside, glinting in the sunlight, were ledgers meticulously detailing years of parishioners' donations and how Father Michael had subtly embezzled them to fund a carefully concealed lavish lifestyle. Beside the ledgers lay a few small pieces of jewelry, a silver ring, a pair of pearl earrings, items some families in the town recognized as belonging to loved ones reported missing or deceased under difficult circumstances years ago, items they thought were lost forever. Finally, Ethan pulled out Eleanor Vance's last letter. His voice lowered as he read every word aloud to the almost deathly silent crowd. "I have found undeniable proof. Father Michael has not only embezzled funds from the congregation but has hidden many other dark sins. He has exploited the sacred trust of everyone to serve his own selfish, cruel purposes. He has betrayed us all, betrayed God. If you are reading this when I am gone, please bring the truth to light. Bring justice to the silent victims. But be extremely careful, for the darkness he has created runs deep and is dangerous." Each word from the letter struck the townsfolk's faith like a hammer blow. They fanned the flames of long-simmering resentment, born from vague suspicions and unexplained losses. An elderly woman burst into tears, her voice trembling with pain and anger. "My God! We trusted him. We gave him all our faith and respect." The crowd began to stir, initial whispers quickly turning into angry shouts. Faces once filled with reverence now flushed with outrage and disappointment. A middle-aged man, the owner of the general store down the street, stepped forward, his eyes red-rimmed, pointing directly at Father Michael. "Father Michael, you betrayed us. You trampled on Mrs. Vance's kindness. You betrayed the very faith we placed in this sacred place." Father Michael, now stripped of all authority and piety, completely crumbled before the crowd's fury. He sank to his knees on the cold stone steps, his panicked eyes darting around as if searching for an impossible salvation. "I'm sorry. I only wanted to protect the church, protect its reputation. I had no choice," he stammered, his voice weak and lost amidst the sea of people demanding justice. Ethan stepped closer, his cold eyes looking directly at the broken man. "Protect the church by turning it into a cover for your crimes? By betraying the trust of the very people who believed in you? This truth cannot be hidden forever. You must face the consequences for everything you've done." The townsfolk began to chant, demanding fair and severe punishment for Father Michael. Amidst the seething crowd, Abigail, the daughter thought lost, who had been captured and nearly killed for knowing the truth, was helped forward by Ethan. Her voice, still weak from her ordeal but filled with strength and resolve, carried clearly, "Mrs. Vance was not afraid. She sacrificed her life so that this light could shine. We cannot allow deceit and evil to continue reigning here. This town deserves a fresh start, a future free from the shadow of darkness and crime." Abigail's words acted like cool water on the fire of anger. The crowd fell silent for a moment, then collectively bowed their heads, observing a moment of silence for Eleanor Vance, the ordinary woman who had done something extraordinary, who had become a symbol of courage and sacrifice for righteousness. Just then the sheriff's car from the neighboring county arrived, its siren wailing like a final punctuation mark to the dark era. Father Michael was led away amidst the heavy, judgmental silence of the townspeople. The atmosphere in the town felt cleansed as if after a storm. The oppressive weight that had burdened them for so long seemed to have lifted. Lucky stood steadfastly beside Ethan, his eyes sparkling in the morning sun, as if understanding that justice had been served, that his beloved owner's sacrifice had not been in vain. Ethan bent down, stroking the loyal dog's soft fur, his brave companion who had played a crucial role in uncovering this secret. He whispered, just loud enough for them both to hear, "We did it, my friend. The truth is out. She can rest in peace now." Lucky gave a soft wag of his tail in agreement, nuzzling his head affectionately against Ethan's hand. The morning light now illuminated the entire town, not just dispelling the fog but bringing with it the hope of rebirth. The people had not only recovered the stolen truth but, more importantly, were beginning to regain their faith in justice and humanity, things that had been eroded and lost for so long. Ethan and Lucky, once anonymous strangers, had become unlikely symbols of loyalty, courage, and the unwavering determination to pursue truth to the very end. They had reminded everyone that no matter how thick the darkness, no matter how well hidden the truth, it will always find a way into the light, as long as there is enough courage and faith to seek it. Part 7. New Dawn and Farewell. The sun finally climbed high, its warm, golden rays, brighter now than at dawn, gently shone down upon the town, chasing away the last vestiges of the long, dark night. The air now carried a true sense of peace, a serenity that had been missing for a very long time. The townspeople no longer gathered before the church with faces etched in anger or grief. Instead, they began to cluster in small groups, talking quietly, looking at each other not with suspicion, but with empathy, unity, and a silent resolve to rebuild what was lost, to heal the wounds. Ethan stood quietly under the shade of an old tree at the edge of the square, observing them with a soft, discreet smile flickering across his weathered face. His work here was done. Beside him, Lucky sat calmly, wagging his tail contentedly, his usually sharp eyes now softened, filled with satisfaction and unwavering loyalty. The town, once shrouded in the darkness of lies, fear, and sorrow, was now truly illuminated by the warm light of truth and hope. Abigail, though still needing time to fully recover physically and mentally, spoke with renewed strength and conviction as she stood among her neighbors and friends. She spoke not as a victim but as a survivor carrying Eleanor's legacy. Mrs. Vance taught us an invaluable lesson. She bravely faced the truth, knowing it could cost her her life. She not only helped us expose horrific crimes but gave us the strength to believe that no darkness is too vast, no lie too elaborate, to hide the truth forever. We owe her and we owe ourselves a better future. The people listened in silence, nodding in agreement, tears now not just of sorrow but of gratitude and the hope burgeoning strongly within each heart. Ethan clearly felt the change in the atmosphere in their eyes. The wound was still there but it was beginning to heal. As the crowd slowly dispersed, each person returning to their daily lives but with a new perspective, Ethan knew it was time for him and Lucky to leave. He bent down and stroked Lucky's head once more. "We did good, my friend. Time to hit the road," he whispered. Lucky looked up at him, his bright eyes sparkling as if understanding their mission here was successfully completed. But Ethan knew his journey, the journey of a traveler seeking forgotten stories and hidden truths, and Lucky's journey, his unexpected but invaluable companion, wouldn't stop here. There was still much darkness in the world that needed light. Before he could turn to leave, an elderly man with hair as white as cotton, his wrinkled hands trembling but his eyes full of sincere gratitude, approached Ethan. "Young man," he said, his voice warm, "you brought light to this dark town. You brought justice for Eleanor and for all of us. Though you were just a stranger passing through, you will forever be a part of this place, a benefactor we will never forget." Ethan smiled, a rare, genuine smile. He gently placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. "The truth isn't mine alone, sir. It belongs to everyone, to those brave enough to seek it and protect it. It was Mrs. Vance's courage and everyone's unity that truly brought the light." With that, Ethan gave a soft whistle for Lucky. Together they left the town, walking down the small dirt road leading away, leaving behind a community slowly reviving under the bright morning sun. They walked on, not looking back, carrying with them the profound lesson that no matter how difficult or dangerous the journey, truth, courage, and unwavering loyalty will always be the torches illuminating the path ahead. Their story in this small town may have ended, but their journey had not. And the tale of the mysterious traveler and the loyal dog who exposed a dark truth would continue to be told, spreading like a legend, inspiring other places, other people facing their own darkness. Today's story is not merely a thrilling mystery solved, but a profound reminder of the enduring value of honesty, the courage to face adversity, and especially the steadfast, unconditional loyalty of a four-legged friend. Hopefully, the story of Ethan, Lucky, and their fight against the darkness in this small town has touched your heart, leaving you with deep reflections on the sacred meaning of truth and the boundless power of unity, love, and bravery.